Photography isn't just an image, it's a moment, a memory, a feeling, a tiny piece of time that will otherwise just disappear forever. Life is constantly moving. Photography gives us the ability to pause it, to freeze a moment and to preserve it. And that's what makes photography so powerful. It's not because of the cameras, not because of the technology, but because of the stories we can tell. Have you ever looked at an amazing photograph and wondered how they captured it? Have you ever seen an incredible sunset photo and wondered why your photos don't look the same? Or maybe you've even picked up a camera and seen all the settings and just thought, nah, this looks way too hard. Well, don't worry, I'm here to change that. Welcome back to the channel, guys. If you're new here, please subscribe, drop a like, all that good stuff. If you're a complete beginner and you don't know a thing, or you're an intermediate and you know some stuff, this video is for everybody. But anyway, let's get into it. Photography begins long before you press the shutter button. It begins with observation. Most people walk through life without really looking around them. They're focused on where they're going. They're looking at their phones or they're rushing from one place to another. And because of that, they miss so many incredible things. A photographer learns to slow down. A photographer notices things. They notice moments, and that's what separates photographers from everyone else. Not their cameras, their awareness. When I first started photography, I thought great photographers had access to amazing locations. I thought they travelled to a new amazing location every week, but it turns out that's not true. An amazing photographer in an ordinary scene and they'll make it work. But why? Because photography isn't about where you are. It's about what you notice. Stop looking for amazing places. Start looking for amazing light, amazing moments and amazing details. They're everywhere. You don't need to train yourself to see them. So how do you even develop the photographer's eye? The answer is surprisingly simple. You practice observing. So now we've talked about the mindset of photography. It's time to understand the tools we use to capture those moments. And trust me, it's simpler than it looks. Good news. Photography isn't nearly as complicated as it seems. In fact, almost every camera setting comes down to one simple thing: light. Photography is literally drawing with light. That's what it means. And these are the three main settings that control light. Together, they're called the exposure triangle. They are aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. First, let's start with aperture. Imagine you're standing in a dark room. Your eyes automatically adjust, don't they? Your pupils become larger so you can collect more light. When you walk from a dark room into a bright sunny day, your pupils become smaller. The camera works in a very similar way. Inside your lens is an opening called the aperture. A larger aperture lets in more light, while a smaller aperture lets in less light. Simple enough? But aperture does something else that's incredibly important. It controls something called the depth of field. Depth of field is simply how much of your image appears sharp. When using a wide aperture, your subject stays sharp while the background becomes blurry. This is why portrait photographers often use wide apertures. And smaller apertures keep the whole scene in focus. This is useful for landscapes where you want everything to be sharp. Next, let's look at shutter speed. It's a bit like when you blink. The camera has a shutter which works in a very similar way. The shutter opens, light enters, the shutter closes. The amount of time that it stays open for is called the shutter speed. Fast shutter speeds freeze motion, and slow shutter speeds capture moments. Let's imagine a bird flying across the sky. Using a fast shutter speed can freeze every detail. But if you use a slower shutter speed, the wings may blur. The bird appears to have movement. Neither is wrong. They're just different creative choices. Now let's talk about ISO. This is often the easiest setting to understand. ISO controls your camera sensitivity to light. A low ISO creates cleaner images. A higher ISO makes your image look brighter. Sounds great, right? Well, there's a trade-off. And as ISO increases, noise begins to appear. Most photographers try to keep the ISO as low as possible. Sometimes increasing ISO is necessary. Now let's put everything together. Aperture controls the depth of field, shutter speed controls the motion, ISO controls the sensitivity to light. But here's the important part. Changing one setting affects the others. Let's say you make shutter speed faster. Less light enters the camera, the image becomes darker. You compensate for that by using a wider aperture or increasing your ISO. Photography is constantly balancing these three settings. That's why they're called a triangle. Now the camera has different modes. Aperture priority mode is one of the best learning tools available. You choose your aperture and the camera chooses the shutter speed. The shutter priority works the opposite way. You choose the shutter speed and the camera controls the rest. And there's no rush. Learning photography is a journey, not a race. The settings are only part of the equation. The perfect exposure, perfect focus, perfect sharpness can still end up with a photograph that nobody remembers. Because photography isn't about creating a scene. It's about arranging a scene. It's about deciding what stays in frame and what doesn't. It's about directing the viewer's attention exactly where you want it to go. That's where composition comes in. So let's dive in. Before I teach you about specific techniques, I want to tell you something important. Rules in photography aren't really rules. They're guidelines. They're tools or even suggestions that often work well. And they can be broken. In fact, some of the greatest photographs ever taken break traditional composition rules completely. So don't think of these as strict laws. Think of these as a tool in your photographic toolbox. So the first rule that I'll explain is the rule of thirds. It's like dividing your image into 9 even squares. Most cameras and phones can actually display this grid on the screen. The idea is, instead of placing your subject directly in the center, try placing it either along the lines or where the lines intersect. For example, if you're photographing a person, try placing them on the left or right side of the frame. If you're photographing a landscape, try placing the horizon on either the upper third or the lower third. Talk about one of my favorite composition rules. Leading lines. Leading lines are exactly what they sound like. They're lines that guide the viewer's eyes through the photograph. These lines can be roads, footpaths, fences, railway tracks, bridges, rivers, even shadows. They create direction and they create depth. And they make photographs feel more immersive. Framing is another powerful technique. Framing is using objects within your scene to create a frame around your subject. Or you can use a doorway, or a tree, or arches, or tunnels, or windows, even a gap between two objects. Balance is another important concept. Imagine placing a large object on one side of a photograph. The image may feel heavy on that side. Sometimes adding a smaller element on the opposite side creates balance. Filters. Filters attach to the front of your lens and can change the way light enters your camera. Think of them like putting sunglasses on your lens. Different filters serve different purposes. Let's look at some of the most useful ones. A polarizing filter is one of the most useful filters you can own. Its job is to reduce reflections and glare. Imagine photographing a lake without a filter. You may only see reflections on the water, but with a polarizer, you can often see beneath the surface. Same applies to windows. Polarizers often help make skies appear richer and more vibrant. Clouds often stand out more dramatically. Landscape photographers use these filters all the time. If you're serious about landscape photography, a polarized filter is one of the best investments you can make. A neutral density or ND filter. It allows you to use the shutter speed. Many photographers use ND filters. The filter blocks the light, the shutter can stay open longer, water becomes smooth and flowing. The same technique works for rivers, waterfalls, ocean waves, even moving clouds. ND filters unlock creative possibilities that simply aren't possible in bright daylight without them. Here's the important question. Do you need filters to become a good photographer? No. Filters are tools. Don't think buying a filter will instantly improve your photography. Always remember, the photographer matters more than the equipment. Thing can still ruin a photograph instantly. Focus. A perfectly composed image with beautiful lighting won't matter if the subject isn't sharp. So for the next section, we're going to learn how to focus like a professional. So let's start at the basics. What is focus? Well, focus is actually quite simple. When something is in focus, it appears sharp and detailed. When something is out of focus, it appears soft and blurry. Your camera uses focusing system to decide where sharpness should appear. The most important rule of focus is to focus on their eyes, always. The eyes are usually the first thing people look at in a portrait. If the eyes are sharp, the image often feels sharp, even if the other parts are slightly soft. Most cameras allow you to choose where the focus point appears. It's called single point lighting. It's also very similar to on your phone, when you click on the screen to focus on something, that is also single point focusing. It's one of the most useful autofocus modes for beginners. Instead of letting your camera decide what to focus on, you're making the decision for it. But there's another autofocus mode, continuous autofocus. This is more useful in moving subjects like wildlife or sports, pets, birds, even somebody running. When the subject doesn't stay still, this mode continuously updates the focus when the subject moves. The camera tracks movement and attempts to keep the subject sharp. Modern cameras are incredibly good at this. Some can even track eyes, faces, animals and vehicles automatically. It's amazing technology, but remember, technology helps. Practice still matters. But even with all of this, your photos might still appear blurry. Many beginners assume blur is always caused by bad focus, but that's not always true. Camera shake. This happens when the camera moves during the exposure. Even tiny movements can affect sharpness. This becomes more noticeable in low light or when using slower shutter speeds. Imagine photographing a running dog. If your shutter speed is too slow, the dog may appear blurred. This isn't a focus problem, it's a shutter speed problem. Remember back to part 2, we're talking about freezing motion. Everything in photography connects together. Sharp photographs are important, but photography isn't a sharpness competition, but it's the story that makes them remember it. If you've made it in this far in the tutorial, thank you so much and congratulations. You will see the world in a new way. Some days you'll take photographs you're proud of, and some days you just won't. That's completely normal. Keep going, keep learning, and keep exploring. And most importantly, keep enjoying the process. Because the best photographers aren't the ones with the most expensive cameras. They're the ones who never stop being curious. So this isn't the end, it's only the beginning. Thank you so much for watching this complete photography masterclass. If you found this video helpful, make sure to leave a like, subscribe for more photography content. Photography is more than taking pictures, it's learning to see. So keep exploring, keep creating, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.